But remember, revision isn't the whole story. There are two sides to this coin. If revision is all about coming up with new ideas or adjusting ideas and changing up the argument of your paper so that it's more coherent and clear, editing is about fine-tuning. It's kind of like tuning a guitar, making little adjustments, little changes so that it sounds better to the ear, or in this case, the written word. And there's kind of two ways we do that in editing, in sentences and in individual words. So let's look at those. When it comes to sentences, your goal here is to make sure that your sentences are clear, coherent, and focused. Clear, coherent, and focused. Now, Brent, you might be saying that's a very wide-ranging possibility. What are some of the individual ways we do that? Good, I'm glad you asked. When you're editing for sentences, ask yourself the following questions. Does my writing contain any fragments or run-on sentences that need to be fixed? As a quick refresher, a sentence fragment is basically a sentence that isn't a sentence. It's usually going to be missing either a subject, the noun that your sentence is about, or it's going to be missing a verb, the action word. And these come in different ways. Went to the store is not a sentence because we don't have a subject. Who went to the store? Whereas Tom, who is in the 3rd grade, also isn't a sentence. We just have Tom, the subject, who is in the 3rd grade is connected to him. We don't know what Tom is doing. We need a verb to complete that sentence. On the other hand, run-on sentences are sentences that are too long. Usually they're going to be done by what we call a comma splice. This is where there is a comma where there should be a period. Remember, as we just said, if a sentence is a subject and a verb, then look for that in your papers. Every time you have a main subject and a main verb and you don't have a word like and connecting them, you want to make sure that is closed off as its own sentence. Don't go overkill. Don't be writing for lines and lines and lines, comma after comma after comma. Close your sentences correctly. It's going to help your reader understand what you're saying a lot better. Do I have too many sentences of the same length? Variety is the spice of life, and oftentimes we want to have a variety in the kinds of sentences we use. If you have too many short sentences in a row, it's kind of like you're in rush hour traffic. Stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, and you just feel like you're getting whiplash. But if you have too many long sentences in a row, you basically run out of breath because you're just talking and talking and talking, and there's no room for breath because you haven't broken the sentence and there's nowhere to go, and do you see what I mean? We like to have variety, so a short sentence followed by a long sentence, then a medium, then another long, then maybe another medium, then a short one, and then a long one, and then a short again, and then another short, and then a medium. Switch it up. It gives your reader a sense of novelty when they can't really tell how long your next sentence is going to be. Have I used passive voice when active voice will do? The difference between them, active voice is where the doer of the sentence is what is, or the subject, is what is emphasized. Brent threw the ball. I am the thrower, I'm the one who did it, so Brent, the subject of the sentence, the true subject, the doer, is in the subject position. But sometimes we do passive voice. We actually flip it so that the thing being acted on is in the subject position. The ball was thrown by Brent. When you do that, it's okay technically because it is a sentence, it's a complete thought, but it can lead to some ambiguity, and sometimes even we just don't know what we're talking about because the ball was thrown is also a sentence. But now we're missing who did the throwing. It leads to confusion, it leads to misunderstanding sometimes. So I would recommend as much as possible, avoid the passive voice. Try to stick to the active voice. Brent threw the ball as much as possible. Another question, do any of my sentences lack parallelism? Now this is a bit of a term, you might not have heard this one before, so let me define it. Parallelism, according to Kirshner and Mendel, is the use of matching words, phrases, clauses, and sentence structure to highlight similar ideas in a sentence. That's a complicated way of saying if you have like a grammatical structure and then you have a different grammatical structure in that same sentence, it can sometimes feel awkward if they're not matching. So try and use similar grammatical structures within sentences whenever possible. You're probably still confused, so let me give you an example. Making the team was one thing, but it was difficult to stay on it. So notice the difference here. The first one, we start with making. It's this what we call gerund. It's a verb that's kind of like a noun, but it's making the team was one thing. And then all of a sudden we completely change the grammatical structure. It was difficult to stay on it. Okay, it's not incorrect, but it's a little bit awkward. If you want your sentences to flow well, to edit effectively, you might want to make the sentences structures parallel. Making the team was one thing, staying on it was another. Do you hear how nice that sounds? Making, staying, making the team, staying on it. Using this kind of setup just flows more naturally, and we like it. Similarly, there are ways you can condense. For several weeks after the storm, the supermarkets had no eggs, they were out of milk, and they did not have any bread. Well, why the different grammatical structures? Why not just say the supermarkets had no eggs, milk, or bread? It's easy, it's simple, and whenever possible, we want to condense on our wording. So, parallelism, use it. Find ways that your sentence structures are unnecessarily different from each other, and find ways to make them similar. Another thing, have I been unclear, unnecessarily wordy, or overly flowery in my language? Let me give you an example. Due to the fact that I was feeling a state of tiredness, I elected to retire at an unusually premature hour to the security of a mattress covered in sheets. Why not just say, because I was tired, I went to bed early? See, here's the thing. I think sometimes as students, we have this idea that because we're in university or in graduate studies, we are here to write complicated ideas, so we have to express ourselves in a complicated way. And sure, there's a time and a place for complex language, but 99% of the time, simplicity is best. Of course, we want to express complex ideas in our papers. That's our goal. But doing so in a simple, easy to understand way often goes a lot farther for helping your argument. Why? Because if you use too many of these overcomplicated phrasings, at best your professor's going to see right through it and know that you're just trying to use a thesaurus to pad your grade. And at worst, they're not even going to be able to understand what you meant, and then they're going to think there's a problem with your argument. So, keep things simple. I know it's tempting, but keep it simple. It's going to go a lot farther in the long run for expressing yourself in a clear and understandable way. And then after sentences, we move on to words, the individual words themselves. So here you can ask yourself questions like, have I selected strong active verbs and can I replace any weak passive ones? A good example of this is like these to-be phrasal verbs that we sometimes use. The danger of these is that they often just end up padding our writing with additional words, sometimes with adjectives or adverbs that we just don't need. So get to the point, express yourself clearly. Is reflective of? Just say reflects. This is reflective of. No, this reflects. I will make an attempt to. I will attempt. This puts an emphasis on. No. It emphasizes. Just tell me the thing directly. George Orwell, in his essay, The Politics of the English Language, he lists a whole bunch of rules for good writing. And one of them I really like is, if you can cut a word out, cut it out. So in this case, don't use a 3 or 4 or 5 word phrase when a single one-word verb will do. It's going to go a lot farther for making your writing clear. You can also look for, again, repetition. Do we have awkward repetition that serves no good purpose? Like I said, repetition can be good in some senses, but too much of it is awkward. They know that their knowledge is outmoded. Well, do we have to say know and knowledge? It just kind of feels unnecessary. Let's not do that. Similarly, eliminate redundant redundancies. This is going to help keep things concise. Don't say final destination. A destination is already the final place you're going. It's not absolutely essential, it's just essential. We don't need to add these extra words for emphasis. They're not needed. Just state your ideas clearly and concisely. And then pay attention to words that we commonly misspell and that spell check might not catch. So, there, and there. Have you used the right there in the proper context? Real and real. Are you talking about a film reel or something in the real world? Affect and effect. Sometimes, you know, those nouns and verbs that sound very similar and maybe are only different by a letter. Have you used the right one in the proper context? Effect is the verb. Affect is the noun. I really hope I got that right. And then statue and statute. Again, different word. Oftentimes, if we're putting something in Microsoft Word, it might not think that that's incorrect, but in context, that's very different. We want to follow the statutes of the Lord with a T, not the statues, as in idols of the Lord. That would be a problem. So make sure that you're paying attention to those words. It can be, if you're not looking for it, it can go wrong very quickly. And then there are final checks. What are some of these just like minor things that you want to do before you hit send into your professor? Double check the accuracy of names, places, and events mentioned in the work. The last thing you want in a history paper is to have accidentally said something happened in 1764 instead of 1864. Similarly, you don't want to misspell somebody's name, because again, that's another thing spell check often doesn't catch. Look for little inconsistencies. Maybe you accidentally do e-mail in some places and then email one word in another. Have you sometimes capitalized one word and then the same word is uncapitalized in other places? You want to make sure you're being consistent with those things. Check your punctuation. Are all of your periods proper? Do you have commas in the right spot? Do you have your apostrophes? Is all the punctuation in your citation in the right spot? After brackets, before footnotes, things like that. And speaking of citation, make sure you go back over your citations for each of your papers. Are they in the right spots? Do all of the paraphrases and quotations in your paper have a citation? Do you have the proper punctuation in your reference list, your bibliography? Have you done all of the formatting of your pages correctly as well? Are the page numbers in the right spot? Are the margins accurate? All of these things are going to be vital for making sure your paper is done well and that your professor is happy with the product you submit. And with that, it's time for another round of practice. So once again, I'm going to put a paragraph on the screen and I want you to look this time for both. I want you to revise and I want you to edit. I want you to look for areas where this paragraph could maybe use a little bit more information. Is there something that's unnecessary and can be taken out? But I want you to spend more time on the editing phase. Look for spelling errors, grammar errors, issues in parallelism, issues with unnecessarily wordy phrasing, and see if you can come up with a way to better express the ideas in this paragraph. So let's take a look at the paragraph here. Genre is a concept today used to discern and categorize different types of literature, and a method which would not have existed during the composition of these works. Yet, when we, scholars, talk about these words today, we have or might have or will classify them by the style, story type, or other like features. These features are largely found with Old Irish literature. They are occasionally found in medieval Welsh literature as well. It is also sometimes found in Indo-European medieval cultures. So, pause the video, see if you can come up with some ways to edit this, and to some extent revise as well to make it a stronger paragraph. Okay, a couple of things that we may want to see on this one. As you can tell, there's a few different errors. We've got things about like just basic spelling errors, classify, we categorize in a method which would not have existed. Some of them even too. Why do we have scholars in brackets? Why not we just say that? So let's look at an example of a way that we could revise and edit this paragraph. Genre is a modern concept used to discern and categorize different types of literature. It is a method which would have not existed during the composition of these works. Yet, here's a big change, most works have been or may be classified in modern-day scholarly work by the style, tone, story type, and other features that comprise them. These shared features, notice how we've adjusted these as well, these shared features are largely found within the corpus of Old Irish literature, and occasionally in medieval Welsh literature as well. In addition, some features may be found in most Indo-European medieval cultures. So do you see how we've adjusted this? Instead of talking about a concept today, we are looking at a modern concept. The phrasing in the middle sentence where it was we have or might have or will classify is now shifted to just be about have been or may be classified, simplifying, getting it down to the basic form. We've also taken those last three sentences, which were very distinct, and combined some of them together, combining ideas to make them a little bit easier and simpler to understand. This is the kinds of things you want to be looking for in your editing. And if you came up with something totally different for your editing, That's okay. There is no one perfect way to revise every single paragraph. There's often going to be lots of different options depending on what you want to emphasize and the kind of voice that you adopt in your paper. So if you came up with different parallel structures, or if you came up with something about changing the wording in a different way, that's totally fine. What's key though is that you do all of these steps. And again, it's not necessarily that it has to be done in the particular order you see on the slide here. But I would say revision should be done before editing. Why is that? Because what's the point of editing? It's fine-tuning. You need to have your ideas refined first. So if you start with editing, if you start by going over the wording and the spelling errors and the sentence structure, and then you go back and all of a sudden realize, oh shoot, I need to remove this paragraph and add a whole new paragraph here, and my thesis actually isn't clear yet, so I need to refine that better. Well, chances are you're going to have to do a bunch more editing again because your ideas weren't refined. So spend the time first revising. Doesn't have to be in the order that I covered them, but make sure you spend time covering the big ideas, the organization, and then once you're happy with the ideas of your paper, that's when you go and make sure that those details in the editing stage are finished.